The morning at Fort Benning began with a crisp electric clarity. The kind of day where sunlight seemed sharper, shadows stretched longer, and every sound, the cadence of boots on asphalt, the snap of rifles, the low murmur of orders, felt heightened. Captain James Harlow stood at attention in the center of the parade field, a commanding figure in crisp camouflaged uniform. The sun glinted off his polished dog tags, and the barrel of his rifle caught the light, sparkling as if heralding the importance of this routine, yet sacred drill. Around him, rows of soldiers moved in perfect synchrony, rifles clutched tightly, boots striking the pavement with military precision. Emily Harlow, his wife, watched from the bleachers set a few yards away, her fingers wrapped around the edge of her chair. She had arrived early, clutching her thermos of coffee more out of habit than desire. The chill in the morning air made her shiver slightly, and she hugged her arms to herself. It wasn't often she could watch James perform in the drills. His schedule rarely allowed for visitors. Yet here she was, heart pounding with a strange mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. She knew how intense these drills could be, how quickly they could spiral into controlled chaos if someone faltered. But James always seemed steady, unshakable, a pillar of calm amid the storm of orders and commands. The drill began in earnest, the rhythmic chants of soldiers echoing against the barracks walls. The commanding officer's voice rang sharp, cutting through the air with authority. "Positions," he barked. "Eyes forward. Attention on your weapons." The precision was hypnotic, the kind that made spectators like Emily almost hold their breath, caught in the mesmerizing coordination of trained soldiers. James's movements were fluid, practiced every turn, lift, and aim, executed flawlessly. Emily's chest swelled with pride as she watched him, noticing the subtle tension in his jaw that indicated focus, the way his eyes scanned the field for any misstep among his team. Then it happened. James stumbled. A misstep so slight, so quick, that in any other setting it would have gone unnoticed. But on this field, in this drill, it was catastrophic. His rifle slipped from his hands, tumbling across the asphalt with a metallic clatter that shattered the rhythm of the formation. Heads snapped toward him, eyes wide with shock. Time seemed to stretch, the echo of the falling weapon magnified in the tense silence that followed. Emily's heart stopped. "James!" She screamed internally, but no words came from her lips. She rose from her seat, leaning forward, scanning the field. Soldiers scrambled to react, but James didn't recover. Instead, his body pitched forward, chest hitting the ground with a sickening thud. Medics were on him in seconds, hands skilled and frantic, checking pulse, breathing, movement. But to Emily, those seconds were eternal. Her stomach twisted, a mixture of fear, panic, and a rising cold sense of helplessness. She couldn't move fast enough. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to grab him, to do something. Anything. Her eyes, however, weren't on James for long. They locked on the rifle lying in the dirt, a silent witness to the sudden chaos. The metallic barrel gleamed under the sun, ominous and almost mocking. Her fingers itched, almost uncontrollably, to pick it up. She had never fired a rifle in combat, not formally, but her upbringing in rural Kentucky had taught her the basics. Her father had been a hunter, a teacher of precision and calm. She had handled weapons countless times, learning to aim, to steady her breath, to trust instinct. Those lessons, buried in her memory, surged now like a lifeline. The noise around her blurred. Soldiers shouted orders, voices overlapping, but Emily's focus narrowed. The rifle at her feet seemed to pulse with silent urgency. A sense of foreboding prickled her skin, an instinct that whispered danger was near. The medics worked on James, their hands methodical, yet she couldn't tear her gaze away from the weapon. She hesitated for only a heartbeat, weighing the impossible options. She wasn't trained, she wasn't authorized, yet the thought of doing nothing, of watching disaster unfold, was unbearable. Then came the roar. From the gate on the edge of the base, a vehicle accelerated, tires squealing against the asphalt. A Humvee, the kind used for military transport, barreled toward the checkpoint with reckless abandon. Shouts erupted. Commands were fired in rapid succession, but the driver ignored them all. Something about the movement, the speed, the deliberate ignoring of orders set Emily's heart hammering. She realized, in a chilling instant, that this wasn't routine. This was unauthorized. This was a potential threat. And she, standing frozen on the sidelines, had the only tool in reach that could possibly stop it. Her legs carried her forward, almost of their own volition. She reached the rifle, crouched, and lifted it with both hands. The weight was heavier than she remembered, unforgiving, but steadying, anchoring her to the present. Gasps erupted around her. Soldiers froze mid-stride, unsure whether to intervene or allow the civilian to act. The hum of the engine grew louder, vibrating through the ground, rattling the nerves of everyone on the field. Emily's fingers tightened around the trigger, her thumb brushing the safety, mind racing. Her chest heaved. She wasn't thinking about protocol, or rank, or consequence. Only one thought dominated: protect James. Protect the soldiers. Her eyes narrowed, focusing on the approaching Humvee. Time slowed. The Humvee loomed larger, a dark rectangle hurtling with intent. Emily's instincts sharpened, honed by fear and training long ago. She remembered her father's voice, calm and steady. Breathe, aim, trust yourself. And she did. She steadied the rifle, aligning the sights, hands trembling but controlled. Around her, chaos erupted. Soldiers shouted, running to intercept. Yet none moved fast enough. Emily realized she was the only barrier between the intruder and the base. Her mind raced over every possibility, every outcome. What if she missed? What if she harmed someone else? The Humvee drew closer, a monstrous silhouette framed by the rising sun. Her finger hovered over the trigger, heart hammering so violently she thought it might burst. The rifle felt like an extension of herself, her will made physical. Every breath she drew was measured, precise, a ritual of survival. Emily had never imagined her life would come to this moment, not in a drill, not in a real threat, not like this. And then, a single terrifying thought crystallized in her mind. If she did nothing, if she hesitated, lives could end. Her eyes locked on the windshield, on the figure behind the wheel, on the trajectory toward disaster. Emily inhaled, exhaled, and tightened her grip. She had no formal military authority, no rank, and no guarantee of accuracy, but she had instinct, courage, and a reason powerful enough to defy all protocol. James's life depended on her. The base's safety depended on her. The seconds stretched taut like a wire about to snap. Her finger moved. The rifle was raised, aimed, steady. Every muscle in her body coiled, ready. Emily's mind emptied of everything but the target, the threat, and the responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. The roar of the engine, the shouts, the distant clatter of boots, it all faded to a singular point of focus. The world was silent, suspended, waiting for what would come next. Emily's hands trembled as they gripped the rifle, its cold metal biting into her palms. The weight was heavier than she anticipated, yet strangely grounding, anchoring her in the moment. Around her, chaos had erupted. Soldiers were shouting orders, running in all directions, but none were in position to stop the accelerating Humvee. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The roar of the engine was like thunder, shaking the ground beneath her feet. Every instinct screamed that the vehicle was not there by accident. Something was very wrong, and the seconds to act were slipping away faster than her breath. She crouched slightly, pressing the butt of the rifle against her shoulder. Memories of long ago lessons with her father in the Kentucky woods surged into her mind: stance, breath control, focus. Her father had drilled into her the mantra: steady your hands, trust your sight, and your body will follow. Emily whispered it under her breath now, almost as a prayer. She exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease just slightly, the rifle aligned with her line of sight. Her eyes tracked the Humvee as it barreled toward the base gate, the vehicle's intentions unmistakable. 1,000 questions swirled in her mind. Who was driving? What did they want? Could this really be a stolen military vehicle, as rumors among the guards suggested? And most importantly, could she, a civilian with limited experience, actually stop it? Fear gnawed at her stomach, a twisting knot of terror and responsibility. Her pulse thundered in her ears, yet amid the adrenaline, she felt a clarity she hadn't known before. Every second she hesitated increased the risk. A soldier lunged toward her, hands outstretched, likely intending to take the weapon from her. Emily's eyes met his for the briefest instant. She saw confusion, disbelief, and hesitation in his expression. He froze. Maybe it was the intensity in her gaze, the absolute focus, the determination that radiated from her like heat. Maybe it was the recognition that she would act even if he didn't. Whatever it was, he stepped back, giving her the space she needed. Emily's heart skipped. She was no longer just the captain's wife. In that suspended moment, she was the only line of defense between disaster and safety. The Humvee drew closer, tires screaming, engine roaring like an angry beast. Emily could see the driver, now a man with a hard, almost manic expression, ignoring shouted commands from the base guards. She noticed the glint of something inside the vehicle, a metallic reflection that made her stomach clench. Her mind raced. Explosives? Weapons? How many people were in danger? She didn't have time to wait for answers. Time had dissolved into a taut, stretching thread, each heartbeat echoing louder than the last. Emily adjusted her stance, knees bent, feet planted firmly against the asphalt. She remembered the drills she had practiced in her youth, the slow, steady inhale, the exhale that calmed trembling muscles. She focused on the target, the driver's face, the windshield. Everything else blurred. Around her, soldiers continued to shout and move, but Emily barely noticed. Her world had narrowed to 3 things: the rifle, the Humvee, and the responsibility that weighed heavier than any weapon she had ever lifted. Her mind flashed briefly to James, lying unconscious in the chaos behind her. His pulse was steady, medics attending, but she knew seconds mattered. If the Humvee broke through, it could reach other areas of the base before anyone could stop it. The thought of him injured or worse propelled her forward. She swallowed hard, gripping the rifle tighter, feeling the muscles in her arms strain. Fear was there. Yes, annoying, cold terror, but it was tempered by determination. She had to act. There was no other choice. The Humvee was now mere meters from the gate. The guards were shouting commands she could barely hear over the engine. The man inside seemed almost oblivious to their presence, focused solely on breaching the barrier. Emily's eyes locked on the windshield. Every muscle in her body tensed. Her finger hovered above the trigger, mind calculating trajectory, distance, and the recoil she would need to control. She thought of every moment of target practice with her father, every lesson drilled into her hands and mind. It all came together now, forming a single sharp clarity. She inhaled, long and deliberate, steadying her aim. The Humvee was moving too fast for hesitation. She whispered James's name under her breath, almost as a prayer, almost as an affirmation. Her focus was absolute. Around her, The shouts of soldiers faded into a background hum, insignificant compared to the decision pressing on her shoulders. For one suspended moment, the world held its breath alongside her. She could feel the tension in the air, the electricity of possibility. Then, as if time itself slowed, Emily noticed a small detail, a reflection in the driver's rearview mirror, a glint of intent that confirmed her fears. There was no stopping him by negotiation. No warnings would be heard. Only action would suffice. Emily's hand tightened around the rifle, her finger brushing the trigger in preparation. The vehicle was almost upon the barricade now, and the seconds remaining could be counted in heartbeats. She exhaled, letting the breath anchor her, the rifle steady. A soldier shouted, "Take cover," but Emily didn't move. She couldn't. She was already committed, already aligned with the action that had become inevitable. Every lesson, every instinct, every ounce of courage in her body focused on one purpose: stop the threat before it breached the base. She could feel the rifle recoil slightly in her hands, the metal solid, reliable, as if affirming that she could do it. Her mind flickered briefly to the possible consequences. What if she missed? What if she accidentally hit someone else? What if she never saw James again? Fear threatened to paralyze her, but determination overrode it. She had no time for doubt. The Humvee's engine was a low, menacing growl now. Closer, louder. Emily's heart thundered. She exhaled slowly, centering herself. One motion, one shot, one instant that would determine everything. The world around her had become a tunnel of focus. Dust swirled in the sunlight. Soldiers moved like shadows at the edge of her vision. The Humvee loomed like an unstoppable force. She raised the rifle to her shoulder, sight aligned perfectly. Her finger pressed the trigger. The anticipation, the tension, the sheer force of the moment surged through her entire body. And then the rifle discharged. The sound cracked through the morning air like lightning. Emily's body recoiled slightly, but she held firm. The Humvee's windshield shattered instantly, spider webbing under the precision of her shot. The vehicle jerked violently, swerving uncontrollably, tires skidding against the asphalt. A cloud of dust, smoke, and debris filled the air. Emily's ears rang. Around her, soldiers shouted, ran, and swarmed toward the scene. The driver was thrown off balance, the vehicle stopping just short of breaking through the barricade. Emily lowered the rifle slowly, her hands still trembling. She had done it. For a brief, suspended second, the base was silent. Shock and disbelief rippled through the ranks. She glanced behind her at James, still attended by medics, his chest rising steadily. Relief mixed with adrenaline in her veins. Emily felt a tremor run through her body, the enormity of what she had done pressing down on her. She had acted. She had stopped a disaster. She had taken responsibility when no one else could. And yet, the adrenaline still pulsed, reminding her that danger was never far. Around her, soldiers stared in awe. Some whispered. Others simply froze, unsure whether to move or honor the civilian woman who had just altered the course of events on the base. Emily sank to one knee, letting the rifle rest across her lap, heart still pounding, breath still ragged. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what had just happened. She had crossed a line that no one imagined, yet she had done it with clarity, courage, and love. And above all, she had saved lives. The crack of the rifle still echoed in Emily's ears as dust and shards of glass spiraled around the Humvee. The vehicle swerved violently, tires screeching against the asphalt, and skidded uncontrollably toward the base barricade. Soldiers dove for cover instinctively, shouts filling the air as the metallic growl of the engine mixed with the thundering of boots. Emily's knees shook under her, adrenaline coursing in waves that made her fingers clutch the rifle tighter, as if she could physically hold back the chaos. For one heart-stopping instant, she was suspended in time, watching her action ripple through the scene like a stone dropped into water. The Humvee slammed against the barricade with a violent crunch, metal grinding, glass scattering in every direction. The vehicle rocked, jolting the driver violently in his seat. Emily's stomach lurched as she instinctively leaned forward, scanning for any sign of movement. The engine revved erratically, smoke curling from under the hood. Soldiers scrambled, shouting orders, and converged on the vehicle. Emily's gaze caught the driver's face, a mixture of shock, confusion, and fury, and she realized he was alive but disoriented. Her hands, still gripping the rifle, trembled from the release of adrenaline and the sheer intensity of the moment. Medics rushed to James first, lifting him onto a stretcher, their movements methodical despite the chaos surrounding them. Emily's chest heaved as she knelt nearby, unable to move from her spot. She had acted on instinct, untrained, yet precise enough to stop the threat. Her mind reeled with disbelief. She had done something she never imagined herself capable of, something that, until now, seemed reserved for trained soldiers. The reality of the moment began to sink in. She had potentially saved countless lives on the base, including her husband's. Soldiers approached cautiously, rifles at the ready, unsure of how to react to the civilian who had just neutralized a direct threat. Some whispered in disbelief, others stared openly, their expressions a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Emily's breathing slowed, though her body still vibrated from the adrenaline. She lowered the rifle gently to the ground, careful not to drop it, and for the first time looked around. The Humvee, now immobilized against the barricade, seemed almost surreal, smoke curling from its engine like the remnants of a storm. One soldier knelt beside her, eyes wide with astonishment. "Ma'am, you just—" His voice faltered. Emily shook her head, unable to speak immediately, the enormity of her action pressing down on her chest. She felt both terrified and relieved, emotions clashing violently. The officer approached next, his expression a careful balance of authority and shock. "That was exceptional," he said slowly. "You acted decisively when no one else could. You may have just saved this entire base." Emily's stomach twisted. She hadn't acted for recognition. She had acted because she had no other choice. Meanwhile, investigators and military police moved quickly to secure the Humvee and assess the threat. They discovered it had been stolen from a nearby lot, equipped with weapons and what appeared to be potential explosives. Emily's stomach churned at the thought of what could have happened if she had hesitated. The chaos she had narrowly controlled now rippled across the base like an electric current, soldiers moving in a coordinated rush to stabilize the scene, yet whispering about the civilian who had intervened. Emily's eyes shifted back to James. The medics were still working on him, checking vitals, ensuring that he was stable. Her chest ached as she imagined the worst-case scenario, James never waking, never seeing her again. The thought had propelled her to act, and now, finally, she allowed herself to acknowledge the relief washing over her as his pulse steadied. Her hands, still tingling from the strain, flexed nervously. She had been terrified, yet her fear had fueled her focus, her precision, her courage. Around her, soldiers began to recover from the shock. A few approached cautiously, not quite knowing how to respond to someone who had acted outside protocol, yet achieved results that no one else could. Their whispers filled the air, fragments of disbelief and admiration blending into a hum of awe. Emily noticed a sergeant approach, eyes wide, his posture rigid with surprise and respect. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say," he admitted, voice low. "You just saved lives." She nodded mutely, unable to speak. Words felt insufficient, meaningless even, in the face of what had just occurred. The base commander arrived moments later, accompanied by aides and security. He scanned the scene, taking in the Humvee, the soldiers, the chaos, and finally, Emily kneeling with the rifle. For a tense heartbeat, he said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he spoke. "You acted. Decisively," he said carefully. "You did what needed to be done. I can't overstate how serious that is. What you did today saved lives, including Captain Harlow's. That cannot be overstated." Emily felt her throat tighten. She hadn't acted for commendation. She had acted to protect the man she loved, the soldiers she had never formally met, and the integrity of the base itself. Emily finally allowed herself a moment to breathe, the rifle resting in her lap. Dust and smoke hung in the air like a tangible reminder of the danger she had just neutralized. The base slowly returned to movement, soldiers checking positions, medics finishing with James, military police securing the intruder. Emily's knees were sore from crouching, her hands sore from gripping the rifle, but she felt a profound sense of clarity. Fear had guided her, yes, but so had instinct and determination. She had done something extraordinary without seeking permission, rank, or recognition. She watched as the intruder was escorted away, shouting incoherently, hands cuffed. Investigators began to assess the Humvee, carefully noting damage and potential explosives. Emily's mind couldn't help but race through possibilities. What if she had missed? What if the intruder had reacted violently? Every what if flashed in her mind like lightning, yet she forced herself to acknowledge the fact that she had succeeded. The base was safe. Lives had been spared. James's life had been spared. Her thoughts turned again to her husband, unconscious yet stable. She clenched his hand briefly as the medics lifted him onto a stretcher. Relief coursed through her veins, mingling with lingering adrenaline. She had acted on instinct, but it was love that had given her the courage to do so. Without thinking of glory or duty or protocol, she had faced a threat head-on and emerged victorious. The realization left her both exhilarated and exhausted, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on her shoulders. Soldiers began to approach Emily, some with awe, others with questions. Cameras had already begun clicking, recording what was happening. The whispers of amazement grew louder, spreading across the base like wildfire. Emily felt a mix of embarrassment and pride. She hadn't wanted attention, she had simply acted. Yet the magnitude of what she had done could not be contained. Around her, the chaos of the moment slowly began to settle, replaced by stunned silence and tentative acknowledgement of her extraordinary courage. Emily looked down at the rifle one last time before carefully setting it aside. Her fingers lingered over the metal for a brief moment, a silent acknowledgement of the role it had played in saving lives. The echoes of the gunshot still resonated in her ears, a sound she would never forget. And in that moment, as the base slowly returned to order, Emily realized that everything had changed. Not just for James, not just for the soldiers, but for herself. She had crossed a line she never imagined crossing, and she had lived to tell the story. The roar of the Humvee's engine faded into an eerie silence as the vehicle lay immobilized against the barricade. Smoke curled upward from the mangled hood, mixing with dust kicked up from the skidding tires. Soldiers moved cautiously, assessing the damage, their rifles still raised, eyes scanning for any further threat. Emily knelt on the asphalt, chest heaving, fingers still trembling from the force of the shot and the surge of adrenaline. She had acted instinctively, without orders, without rank, but she had stopped a potential disaster. Her gaze shifted from the Humvee to James, lying unconscious on the stretcher, and a wave of fear, mixed with relief, crashed over her. Around her, the base slowly began to regain order. Soldiers who had scattered now regrouped, whispers rippling across the ranks as they pieced together what had happened. Some stared openly at Emily, disbelief etched across their faces. A few younger recruits whispered excitedly to one another, clearly awestruck by the fact that a civilian woman had acted when trained soldiers had only seconds to react. Emily remained still, her focus drawn inward, her thoughts consumed by the moment's enormity. She had saved lives, yes, but the weight of what she had done pressed heavily against her chest. Medics were attending to James, working quickly and efficiently to stabilize him. One lifted a stethoscope to his chest, listening intently, while another adjusted the oxygen mask. Emily's stomach twisted as she watched, her mind racing through every possible scenario. What if he hadn't survived? What if the force of the shock or the panic around him had caused lasting damage? She wanted to rush forward, to hold his hand, to whisper that everything would be okay, but she trusted the medics, their hands skilled and steady, even amid the chaos. The intruder, the man driving the Humvee, had been dragged from the vehicle and cuffed. His face was a mask of shock and rage, eyes darting frantically as he realized that his plan had been thwarted. Investigators moved in, documenting every detail: the position of the vehicle, the shattered windshield, the skid marks on the asphalt, the trajectory of Emily's shot. Emily barely registered them. Her mind was still anchored on James and the rifle she had wielded to save him. She could feel the lingering tremor of fear and adrenaline coursing through her veins, a reminder that the danger had only just passed. A sergeant approached, his expression a mix of awe and cautious authority. "Ma'am, we don't even know what to say," he stammered, glancing between the Humvee, the soldiers, and Emily herself. "You acted decisively. You stopped that vehicle. You saved lives." Emily's throat tightened, words failing her. She nodded quietly, unable to articulate the emotions swirling inside. Pride, fear, relief, exhaustion, they all collided, leaving her breathless and shaking. She had acted not for recognition, not for heroism, but because she had no other choice. Yet now, the weight of responsibility and the enormity of the consequences pressed down on her. The base commander arrived, flanked by aides and security officers. He surveyed the scene, his eyes scanning the Humvee, the medics, the soldiers, and finally, Emily kneeling with a rifle resting across her lap. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of authority and contemplation. Slowly he approached, and with deliberate calm, spoke. "Ma'am, your actions today were extraordinary. You acted where trained soldiers could not, and you stopped a threat that could have resulted in catastrophic loss of life. Captain Harlow owes you his life. So does this base." Emily swallowed hard, the words sinking deep into her chest. As the medics lifted James onto a stretcher and wheeled him toward the medical bay, Emily followed, her hands brushing against the cold metal of the stretcher handle. Her heart pounded, a mix of adrenaline and fear. James remained unconscious, his chest rising steadily but shallowly. She whispered his name softly, almost instinctively, praying for him to wake, praying that he would understand what had happened when he did. The medics moved quickly, checking vitals, adjusting equipment, murmuring reassurances she could barely hear over the pounding of her own heart. Around the perimeter, soldiers continued to secure the base. Investigators documented every detail of the Humvee, its trajectory, and the condition of the barricade. Emily's mind raced with what-ifs. What if she had missed? What if the vehicle had breached the base despite her efforts? Every possible scenario flashed through her thoughts, and yet each was tempered by the undeniable fact that she had succeeded. The base was intact, the threat neutralized, and James, though unconscious, was alive. Relief mingled with exhaustion, leaving her feeling both elated and physically drained. The intruder, now restrained and under careful observation, shouted incoherently, clearly disoriented by the crash and Emily's decisive action. Soldiers kept a cautious distance, wary of any further surprises. Emily's gaze flicked to him briefly, a cold realization settling in. This had been real. The danger had been tangible, imminent, and lethal. Yet she had confronted it, acted decisively, and emerged unscathed. The gravity of what she had done was slowly sinking in, a mixture of fear and awe at her own courage. Around her, whispers spread through the ranks like wildfire. Soldiers who had witnessed her action exchanged astonished glances. Younger recruits huddled together, repeating what they had seen, as if trying to process the fact that a civilian woman had just neutralized a potentially deadly threat. Emily remained quiet, her focus still anchored on James, still processing the enormity of her own actions. She hadn't sought attention, yet it had found her anyway. She had crossed a boundary she never imagined, yet she knew it had been necessary. The base slowly returned to a semblance of order. Medics finished their work on James, confirming that he was stable and could be transported safely. Soldiers began cleaning up debris from the Humvee crash, securing the barricade and re-establishing their positions. Emily sat on the asphalt briefly, a rifle beside her, absorbing the aftermath. She felt the tremor of adrenaline slowly recede, leaving a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The hum of activity around her was a stark contrast to the intense, focused silence she had experienced moments before, the calm before her decisive action. Finally, she allowed herself a moment to exhale, her body sagging as the tension drained away. She had acted without hesitation, without orders, and yet with precision. She had saved lives, prevented potential disaster, and kept her husband alive. The enormity of her actions pressed upon her, a mix of pride, exhaustion, and lingering fear. Emily realized that she had crossed a line she never imagined crossing, but she had done so out of love, instinct, and an unwavering determination to protect those she cared for. As the dust settled and soldiers regrouped, Emily looked once more at the Humvee, a shattered windshield, and the barricade. The scene, chaotic moments ago, now felt surreal, almost cinematic in its stark clarity. She had acted, and the consequences were monumental. The base was safe, James was alive, and she had emerged as an unexpected hero. Yet amidst the chaos and adrenaline, a quiet thought lingered. She had no desire for recognition. She had done what she had to do, and that was enough. The hum of activity at Fort Benning had finally begun to slow. Soldiers moved with purposeful urgency, clearing debris from the Humvee crash, securing the barricade, and carefully escorting the restrained intruder to a holding area. Investigators combed the scene for evidence: tire marks, shattered glass, and the precise trajectory of Emily's shot. Amid the flurry of military efficiency, Emily remained kneeling beside the stretcher that carried James, her hands brushing his uniform lightly as if willing him to wake. Her pulse was still high, adrenaline lingering like an echo in her veins, but a subtle relief began to creep into her chest. He was still alive. Minutes felt like hours as she waited, glancing anxiously at the medics working over him. James's face was pale, a sheen of sweat covering his brow, lips slightly parted as he breathed shallowly. Every instinct in Emily screamed at her to lean in, to hold him, to assure him that everything was okay, but the medic's hands were precise and confident, and she had to trust them. She swallowed hard, pressing her lips together to keep from speaking aloud, keeping her focus on the steady rise and fall of his chest. Finally, the head medic nodded to a nearby officer. "He's stable. He'll be conscious soon, but he's going to need rest and observation." Emily exhaled audibly, the tension in her shoulders relaxing fractionally. She had saved the base, neutralized the threat, and most importantly, kept her husband alive. The enormity of what had occurred began to hit her in waves. She had acted without training, without orders, and yet perfectly, decisively. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had crossed a line into territory she never imagined she would tread. Soldiers began approaching cautiously, unsure how to respond to the civilian who had just changed the course of events. Some whispered in awe. Others approached with hesitant respect. A young recruit, barely out of training, stared at her with wide eyes. "Ma'am, I've never seen anything like that," he stammered. You saved all of us." Emily gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She wasn't seeking recognition. She had acted out of necessity, instinct, and love. Still, the admiration in the soldier's eyes was impossible to ignore. It pressed on her, heavy and unfamiliar. The base commander arrived, his expression a careful mixture of authority, respect, and astonishment. He surveyed the scene, the damaged Humvee, the restrained intruder, the organized chaos of soldiers, and finally, Emily kneeling beside James's stretcher. He approached her, eyes steady, voice measured but filled with weight. "Ma'am," he began, "your actions today were extraordinary. You acted decisively where trained soldiers could not, and you stopped a threat that could have resulted in catastrophic loss of life. Captain Harlow owes you his life. So does this base." Emily's throat tightened. Words failed her, and she only nodded, her hands gripping the edge of the stretcher. The medics began to wheel James into the medical bay, the steady rhythm of their movement grounding Emily in the moment. She followed, moving quickly yet cautiously beside the stretcher, her mind spinning with a mixture of relief, fear, and lingering adrenaline. She had acted instinctively, yet perfectly. The reality of the situation, how close the threat had come, how quickly she had been forced to act settled into her consciousness. Every step toward the medical bay was punctuated by the echoes of gunfire and engine roars that still rang in her ears. As James was moved into the examination room, Emily finally allowed herself to touch his hand. His fingers were limp, but warmth remained, and she pressed her own gently against his palm. She whispered his name softly, praying he would awaken, praying that he would understand what had happened when he did. Minutes stretched into an eternity as she watched him, noting the subtle changes in his breathing, the faint flicker beneath his eyelids. Every instinct in her screamed that he was okay, but nothing could fully erase the anxiety coursing through her. Suddenly, James's eyelids fluttered. Emily's heart leapt. She leaned closer, keeping her voice low but urgent. "James, it's okay. You're safe. You're going to be fine." His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the light, and his gaze fell on her. Recognition dawned, and relief poured over her like a wave. "Emily," he whispered, voice hoarse, strained, but unmistakable. Tears sprang to her eyes, and she grasped his hand more firmly, feeling the warmth of his return. Relief, joy, and exhaustion collided in a heady mixture, leaving her breathless. As James began to regain strength, he listened silently as Emily recounted everything: the Humvee, the driver, the shot. Her voice trembled as she described the seconds that had felt like hours, the precise moment she had pulled the trigger, the crash, and the chaos that had followed. James's hand squeezed hers weakly, his lips pressing into a grateful, exhausted smile. "Emily," he said softly, "you didn't just save the base. You've saved me." Her own tears fell freely at that, a release of tension, fear, and overwhelming emotion. For the first time since the morning's events, she allowed herself to feel the magnitude of what she had done. Outside the medical bay, the base was still buzzing with activity. Soldiers whispered her name, some nodding respectfully, others shaking their heads in disbelief at the actions of the civilian woman who had just changed the course of the day. Reporters had already begun to arrive, drawn by the rumors spreading rapidly. Cameras clicked, microphones hovered, but Emily paid them no mind. Her focus remained on James, on his steady breathing, and the relief that he was alive. Recognition was secondary. Survival, safety, and love were paramount. The base commander returned briefly, standing at the foot of James's bed. "Captain Harlow will be fine," he said carefully. "Your actions today, they cannot be overstated. You acted decisively, without hesitation, and with precision. The base owes you everything." Emily swallowed, nodding again. She had never sought accolades. She had acted because it was necessary, because hesitation was not an option, and because she refused to lose the man she loved. Yet the acknowledgement was undeniable, and she allowed herself a small, grateful nod. Hours passed as James continued to regain strength under the watchful care of the medics. Emily remained at his side, holding his hand, whispering quietly, and ensuring that he was aware of what had transpired. Soldiers occasionally stopped by to offer brief words of thanks, eyes wide with admiration. Emily smiled faintly, humbled by their respect, but focused solely on James's recovery. She had acted with precision and courage, yet the emotional toll was undeniable. Her body was exhausted, her mind spinning, but the knowledge that James was alive made every second worth it. By late afternoon, James was sitting up, supported by Emily and the medics. His voice was still hoarse, but he looked at her with profound gratitude. I can't believe you did that," he whispered, squeezing her hand. Emily shook her head, a small smile breaking through her fatigue. "I had to," she said simply. "I couldn't do nothing. I wouldn't forgive myself if I hadn't." His eyes glistened with emotion, and for a moment, the world outside the hospital walls, the chaos, the fear, the danger was irrelevant. They were safe. They were together. Emily's gaze drifted briefly to the window, where the sun had begun to dip toward the horizon. The base, though still active, had regained a semblance of normalcy. Soldiers continued to patrol. Investigators documented the Humvee, and the intruder remained in secure custody. Yet Emily's thoughts remained anchored to the morning's events, to the adrenaline, the fear, the instinctive action, and the overwhelming relief of seeing James alive. She had faced a moment of unimaginable intensity, and she had acted decisively, courageously, and successfully. By the next morning, news of Emily's actions had spread through Fort Benning like wildfire. Soldiers still whispered in awe, and new recruits paused mid-drill to discuss the events of the previous day. The base commander had convened a quick debrief, acknowledging the unprecedented situation. A civilian had intervened, neutralized a stolen military vehicle, and prevented what could have been a catastrophic attack. Word traveled fast, and within hours, Emily found herself standing in the center of a gathering crowd of officers, soldiers, and reporters, her hands clasped nervously as she tried to steady a racing heartbeat. Emily's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She had acted instinctively, without protocol, without orders, yet flawlessly. The weight of her actions pressed down on her like a physical presence. Could she be held accountable for crossing the boundaries of civilian life into military operations? The base commander, sensing her unease, stepped forward, his gaze firm but compassionate. "Ma'am," he began, "your actions yesterday were nothing short of extraordinary. You displayed courage, presence of mind, and decisiveness that saved lives, including your husband's and countless others." Emily nodded quietly, overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation. Reporters jostled for position, microphones thrust toward her face, cameras clicking incessantly. Emily's instincts urged her to retreat, to step back into the shadows where she belonged. Yet she stood her ground, glancing at James, who had insisted on being present despite his exhaustion. His gaze met hers, a silent reassurance passing between them. She had acted out of necessity, not for recognition, yet now recognition had found her. The tension in her chest mingled with a strange, unfamiliar pride. She had crossed a line she never thought she would, and the consequences had been overwhelmingly positive. Questions came rapidly, voices overlapping. "Can you describe what went through your mind when you picked up the rifle?" one reporter asked. Emily swallowed hard, carefully choosing her words. I didn't think," she said softly. "I just acted. I couldn't do nothing. I had to protect my husband and everyone on the base." The simplicity of her answer seemed to resonate with those around her. Soldiers exchanged glances of admiration, whispers spreading that courage sometimes came from instinct and love rather than training alone. Meanwhile, officials began taking statements, documenting the incident in detail. Emily was careful, recounting the events methodically, yet her hands trembled slightly despite her efforts to appear composed. She had never been in a situation like this. Before, her life had revolved around family, support, and quiet devotion, not heroics. Yet the clarity of her actions, the decisiveness of her choice, and the precision with which she neutralized the threat left no doubt. She had acted flawlessly, despite her civilian status. James, still seated beside her, offered quiet reassurances, occasionally squeezing her hand. "You were incredible," he said softly, his voice still hoarse. "I don't know how to thank you enough." Emily shook her head, tears threatening to fall. She hadn't acted for gratitude, accolades, or recognition. She had acted because it was necessary, because hesitation was not an option, and because she refused to allow anyone she loved to be harmed. Yet now, in the glare of attention and acknowledgement, she felt the weight of what she had accomplished settling heavily on her shoulders. Officers began discussing formal recognition. Commendations, awards, and even proposals to formally involve Emily in safety training were mentioned. Emily listened quietly, only half registering the words. She wasn't a soldier, didn't want to be, and had no desire for medals. Yet the acknowledgement was impossible to ignore. The enormity of her actions was evident in every conversation, every glance, every whisper. She had changed the narrative of that morning completely, and everyone present seemed keenly aware of it. By midday, the media attention intensified. Reporters lined up outside the medical bay, cameras poised to capture any moment of Emily speaking. Soldiers paused in their duties, watching in quiet awe as the civilian woman who had just saved the base became the center of attention. Emily's thoughts drifted inward. She had acted out of necessity, but now the consequences, public attention, official recognition, and the potential for lasting notoriety were pressing down on her. She felt a mixture of pride, fear, and exhaustion. Her body was still trembling slightly, her muscles sore from the previous day's adrenaline. Later in the day, Emily found herself alone briefly, leaning against a wall in a quiet corridor of the base hospital. She closed her eyes, taking slow breaths, trying to let the tension drain from her body. Her mind replayed the events of the previous day, the roar of the Humvee, the split-second decision to pick up the rifle, the shot, the crash, the chaos that followed, and finally, James's steady pulse under the hands of the medics. She had acted decisively in an impossible situation, and now the consequences were unfolding in ways she hadn't anticipated. The quiet was shattered by a soft knock. James entered, moving slowly but deliberately. His eyes met hers, filled with gratitude and love. "I don't know how to explain it," he said, voice still weak. "You didn't just save lives. You saved me. You were perfect. Calm, precise, courageous. I couldn't have asked for anything more." Emily's throat tightened. She shook her head, words failing her. "I just did what I had to," she whispered. "I couldn't do nothing. I couldn't lose you." The weight of her emotions pressed down on her, and tears ran freely. Relief, love, and exhaustion collided, leaving them both silent for a moment, simply holding each other. By evening, the base had begun to settle back into routine, though whispers of Emily's heroism continued to circulate. Soldiers shared stories of what they had witnessed, emphasizing her courage, composure, and instinct. New recruits were told her story during briefings, instructed that heroism sometimes came from unlikely sources. Emily remained quiet, focused on James and his recovery. She had no desire for fame, medals, or accolades. The satisfaction she felt came from the knowledge that she had acted decisively, protected her husband, and prevented disaster on the base. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Emily allowed herself a final breath of calm. She had faced terror, acted instinctively, and survived. She had crossed boundaries she never imagined crossing. Yet she had emerged intact, her courage proven, and her love for James validated. The base was safe, the intruder secured, and lives had been saved. In that quiet moment, Emily understood that heroism often required instinct, courage, and love, and she had possessed all three when the moment demanded it. The morning after the crisis brought a calm that felt almost surreal at Fort Benning. The base had returned to routine, drills resumed, and soldiers moved with measured precision. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet reverence lingered. Whispers about Emily's heroism threaded through the ranks, carried in hushed tones across barracks, mess halls, and training fields. New recruits learned of the civilian woman who had acted decisively to save lives and the base itself. Emily, however, had little interest in the accolades that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Her mind was focused on James, on his recovery, and on the quiet realization that life, fragile and unpredictable, had offered her a second chance. James had spent the night under close observation, and by morning he was alert, though still weak. The medics had cleared him for minimal activity, warning him not to overexert himself. Emily had stayed beside him, sleeping in a chair beside his bed in short bursts, her own body refusing rest until she knew he was truly safe. Now she watched him stretch slightly, the color returning to his cheeks, the tension of the previous day's near disaster slowly ebbing from his posture. Relief and gratitude swelled in Emily's chest, a tide that threatened to spill over. "You're awake early," she said softly, a faint smile on her lips. James returned the smile, though exhaustion was evident in the subtle droop of his shoulders. "Couldn't sleep?" he admitted. "Too many thoughts. Too many memories of yesterday. I can't stop thinking about what you did. You were incredible, Emily. I don't know how you did it." Emily shrugged lightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I had to," she said simply. "There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. I just acted." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the magnitude of the moment she had lived through. She looked down at her hands, remembering the weight of the rifle, the recoil, the precise moment she had fired. Every detail was still vivid, almost painfully so. James reached out, his hand gently taking hers. "You didn't just act, you saved lives. You saved me. And the soldiers on the base." He paused, swallowing, eyes glistening with emotion. "You're a hero, Emily. No one can take that away from you." Emily's heart tightened at the word. "I'm not a hero," she whispered. "I just couldn't do nothing. I couldn't just stand there." Her gaze met his, and she realized the truth in his words. She had acted decisively with courage that came not from training, but from love, instinct, and an unyielding sense of responsibility. The realization settled deep within her. Heroism wasn't always about medals or rank. Sometimes it was about the choices one made in a single crucial moment. The quiet of the hospital room was broken by the soft hum of activity outside. Soldiers passed through the corridor, some nodding respectfully to Emily, others whispering her name with reverence. She realized that her actions had created ripples beyond her own life, beyond James's recovery. The soldiers were inspired, the base safer, and the story of her courage had begun to take on a life of its own. Yet she remained focused on the most personal consequence. The man lying beside her, safe and alive because of her actions. Hours passed, and James slowly regained strength. Medics encouraged light movement, and Emily helped him sit up fully, supporting his back as he adjusted to the upright position. The physical strain was evident, but so was the determination in his eyes. He glanced at her, gratitude mingling with awe. "I keep thinking about the moment, about the shot," he said quietly. "I can't imagine anyone else doing what you did." Emily's fingers tightened around his. "It wasn't bravery," she said, voice low. "It was instinct. I couldn't stand by and watch you get hurt. Or worse. That's all it was." James shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It was everything. Courage, precision, love, all of it. You changed the course of everything yesterday. I owe you more than words can say." The base commander arranged a private meeting later that day, acknowledging Emily's heroism in a more formal manner. He spoke with measured authority, yet his words carried weight and sincerity. "What you did yesterday, Ms. Harlow, is extraordinary," he said. "You acted decisively in the face of imminent danger, without hesitation and with perfect judgment. Your actions have saved lives and inspired everyone here. While you are not a member of the armed forces, the courage you displayed today embodies the highest ideals of service and valor." Emily listened quietly, a mix of pride and discomfort welling inside her. Recognition was never her goal. She had acted because it was necessary. Yet the acknowledgement was undeniable, a testament to the extraordinary nature of her decision. She realized that her actions would be remembered not for fame or accolades, but as a testament to what ordinary people could do in extraordinary circumstances. Later, as the sun dipped low over the base, Emily and James walked slowly through the courtyard, their hands intertwined. The soldiers continued their duties, yet many paused to glance in their direction, some nodding respectfully, others whispering quietly among themselves. The air was filled with a subtle reverence, an acknowledgement that something remarkable had occurred. A civilian had stepped into a moment of crisis and emerged victorious. Emily's mind wandered to the events of the previous day, the roar of the Humvee, the split-second decision to act, the shot, the crash, and the chaos that followed. She realized that, despite fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty, she had trusted herself and acted with precision. The ripple effects of that moment extended far beyond the immediate danger. Soldiers had seen her courage, James had survived, and the base had been protected. As they reached the edge of the training field, Emily paused, looking out over the neatly lined rows of barracks and the distant mountains beyond. The sun cast long shadows, bathing the base in a golden light. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the previous day lift slightly, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment and relief. James squeezed her hand, a silent affirmation of their bond, and together they stood, watching the base return to its rhythm, knowing they had survived something extraordinary together. Days passed at Fort Benning, and the story of Emily Harlow's courage continued to resonate across the base. Soldiers and officers alike recounted the events with awe and admiration, emphasizing how a civilian had acted decisively to neutralize a stolen Humvee, save lives, and protect the integrity of the base. Though Emily remained humble, refusing to dwell on her heroism, the respect she received was undeniable. Even recruits who had joined the military just days before spoke of her actions as an example of courage and responsibility, reminding everyone that bravery often came from instinct, love, and a willingness to act. Emily's days were now largely spent alongside James, ensuring his recovery remained on track. The medics had cleared him for light activity, and the physical strain on him was gradually diminishing. Yet the psychological toll of nearly losing his life lingered, and Emily offered a quiet presence, guiding him through each step. Their bond, forged through love and tested by crisis, had grown stronger. Each glance, each touch, was a reaffirmation of survival and shared experience, a silent acknowledgement that they had endured something extraordinary together. The base commander arranged a formal ceremony to recognize Emily's actions. Soldiers lined the parade ground, standing at attention as she stepped forward. Cameras and reporters had been invited to document the unprecedented event, a civilian being honored for valor in a military context. Emily's heart thudded in her chest as she approached the podium, a mixture of nerves and lingering adrenaline making her hands tremble slightly. James was at her side, holding her hand firmly, a silent pillar of support. The commander's voice carried across the assembled soldiers. "Ms. Emily Harlow," he began, "yesterday you acted in a moment of extraordinary danger, with courage, precision, and decisiveness. Your actions not only saved lives, but also protected the integrity of this base. You exemplify the values we hold dear: bravery, selflessness, and unwavering responsibility. Today, on behalf of the United States Army and every life you have protected, we honor you." Applause erupted across the parade ground, echoing off the barracks and surrounding buildings. Soldiers' faces were filled with respect and admiration, some clapping with tears in their eyes, others standing silently, fists over hearts in solemn recognition. Emily's chest tightened. She had never sought recognition, never imagined herself in this position. And yet, the acknowledgement was overwhelming, a tangible affirmation of her courage and sacrifice. As she received the commendation, a framed certificate, and an engraved medallion, Emily felt an emotional swell she could barely contain. Her eyes found James's, and in that moment, words were unnecessary. Every fear, every heartbeat of terror, every surge of adrenaline from the day before converged into a profound sense of relief and gratitude. They had survived. Lives had been saved. The base was safe. And in that safety, Emily and James had found a renewed sense of purpose together. After the ceremony, soldiers and officers approached Emily to offer personal thanks. Some recounted how they had watched her in awe, how her courage had inspired them to trust their instincts in moments of danger. Others simply shook her hand, eyes moist, conveying gratitude that words could not fully express. Emily accepted each acknowledgement quietly, her thoughts returning constantly to James, whose presence reminded her why she had acted in the first place. Heroism, she realized, was less about accolades and more about protecting what mattered most. Later, Emily and James walked through the base, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the training fields. Soldiers moved with purpose around them, yet many paused to glance in their direction, nodding respectfully or murmuring quiet words of admiration. Emily kept her gaze forward, but each acknowledgement pressed lightly on her heart, a reminder of the extraordinary consequences of her single, decisive action. She had crossed a line she never imagined, yet emerged not only unscathed, but also transformed. "I still can't believe what happened," James said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. You acted like someone trained for combat, like someone who had done this before." Emily shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "I didn't," she said. I couldn't do nothing. I had to protect you, protect everyone. Everything else just fell into place." Her gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the mountains met the sky. The morning's chaos, the roar of the Humvee, the chaos of the base, it all seemed distant now, tempered by the warmth of survival and human connection. James squeezed her hand, leaning slightly against her shoulder. "You saved more than lives yesterday," he said quietly. "You saved me. You saved us." Emily felt a tear slip down her cheek, one of many she had shed since the events began. "We saved each other," she whispered. "In a way, that's the part that matters most." The base commander later visited the couple privately. ensuring that Emily was properly documented in military records for her actions, even as a civilian. He acknowledged that her courage had set a precedent, one that would be remembered for years to come. Soldiers would recount the story of Emily Harlow, the woman who picked up a rifle, faced imminent danger, and saved lives without hesitation. The acknowledgement, though formal and public, also carried a personal weight that Emily quietly carried with her, an enduring reminder of what human instinct, love, and courage could achieve in a single, pivotal moment. Evening fell, and Emily and James sat together in a quiet corner of the base, the sounds of soldiers' activity fading into the distance. The world felt simultaneously vast and intimate, the enormity of what had happened tempered by the simple presence of one another. Emily reflected on the whirlwind of events, the adrenaline, fear, precision, chaos, and ultimate relief. Each moment had tested her limits, and yet she had emerged with a newfound confidence in herself, a quiet assurance that she could face the unimaginable when it mattered most. "I never imagined this," James said softly, eyes fixed on hers. "I never imagined that one moment could change everything." Emily leaned her head against his shoulder, letting the exhaustion finally wash over her. "Neither did I," she admitted. "But it did. And we made it through together." The stars began to twinkle over Fort Benning as the base settled into night. Soldiers patrolled, guards remained vigilant, and the intruder had been securely removed from the premises. Yet for Emily and James, the moment was quieter, more personal, a private acknowledgement of survival, resilience, and enduring love. She had acted decisively, heroically, and with unwavering instinct. He had survived because of her courage. And in the quiet aftermath, Emily realized that her life and James's had been forever changed by one extraordinary morning. The story of that day would ripple through the base, through soldiers' recollections, and through media reports for months, perhaps years. Yet for Emily, the truest legacy was not the recognition, not the commendation, and not the whispers of admiration. The truest legacy was the knowledge that, when faced with impossible choices, she had acted, she had protected those she loved, and she had found the strength within herself to rise to a challenge no one anticipated. In the end, the courage she had shown was hers alone, and it had saved lives. Emily tightened her hand around James's, feeling the warmth, the pulse of life she had fought so fiercely to protect. And as the night deepened over the base, they sat together, quiet, exhausted, and forever changed, the memory of that morning etched indelibly into their hearts.